It's Mike from Pennsylvania. How are you?
Mike from PA. How are you? 610 area code. Now it's popping up.
I'm doing very well. I wanted to call in about this whole Warren Bernie kerfuffle. I had a slightly viral tweet about it because it was so ridiculous. I couldn't believe it was a real story.
All right, let me just catch people up with the quick and dirty on this. There was a report in Politico that there were talking points that were going out to canvassers, I guess presumably in Iowa, that where the canvassers would say if they knocked on the door and people said that they were an Elizabeth Warren fan, that the canvasser would say, well, did you know Elizabeth Warren's support comes from wealthier, more educated Democrats, and Bernie's comes from folks who are less educated, more working class, and he's going to be able to expand the voting base, right? I mean, that's right? Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
and then let's just hear Elizabeth Warren's. We have Elizabeth Warren's response. Now, we should say, subsequent to this, I think contemporaneously, a lot of people are saying, like, this is a dumb thing to do. Who the heck gives negative talking points to canvassers? This sounds sort of suspicious, like it's not necessarily an official thing. And I think it's turned out that it's not. But it's, this is certainly something that Michael has said, Jamie has said. I think that Politico has written about in July. I mean, it's not a non-factual thing. I guess maybe some people find it offensive. Here is Warren's response, which I think, here, go ahead.
The Bernie Sanders campaign and the way that they are talking about you at the doors here in Iowa, basically saying that your voters are people who will vote Democrat anyway, that you don't bring new bases into the Democratic tent. Why is he wrong?
I was disappointed to hear that Bernie is sending his volunteers out to trash me. Bernie knows me and has known me for a long time.
Pause it. If you couldn't hear it, she said, the question was, Sanders volunteers are going out there saying that his voters will expand the base and that your voters will vote for Democrats anyways. And she said, I am disappointed to hear that Bernie is sending his supporters out there to trash me.
Yeah.
And then, all right, so just go back and let's just continue. Okay, and then he says, Bernie has known me for a long time. He knows what I'm about, where I've come from, and the coalition of the grassroots movement we're trying to build, which was not a response to the question. And it suggests to me that this is, and every campaign can have their strategy. I don't think it's a particularly. I have some thoughts about the efficacy of it, but it's a strategy, and her strategy is to make it as if Sanders is trashing her specifically and is, I guess, divisive in some way. Mike, go ahead, unless you...
Wait, can I ask one clarifying question?
Hold on one sec, Mike. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me, Mike? Can I ask one clarifying question about this that I'm kind of curious about?
Sure.
Do we think at this point in time that the Warren campaign knew that this was not an official script of the Bernie Sanders campaign? Like, was it the journalist who told them that, or had they already kind of figured out all the facts and made the decision which way they were going to spin it?
I don't think it makes a difference. I don't think it made a difference to them either. It's a story, and they're just going to go with it.
So, I mean, the reason why I think it's a knowing lie is because I've been in campaigns for many years, and the idea that you would say something negative to volunteers or have them go out there with negative scripts is never done, ever. It is just like actually part of something that would be so like negative for the way a volunteer doesn't come in for a candidate so they could go and spit bile all day. That's just not. It's an insane position, and everybody knows that. It's like standard practice for how volunteers are handled, and in fact, people discourage like members of the campaign saying negative things within like volunteer offices. So as soon as I saw this, I was like, there's no fucking way that Bernie Sanders, of all people, the Mr. Never Attack Anyone, basically, guy is sending volunteers out there like that. So on its face, it immediately failed the smell test. So the question to me, so I was like, okay, this is stupid. So I immediately tweeted that, like, because first of all, the article was like, I can't show you the document to protect sources and methods. I was like, what? What is this, some sort of spy shit? So that set off an alarm right away. And then I tweeted immediately, this is not true. And then what really pissed me off and what went viral for me is immediately got in a fundraising email from the Warren campaign saying, this is what Bernie thinks of you. And it was saying how Bernie was attacking her supporters. And so this is like such a coordinated lie that it actually blew me off my feet, because these are experienced campaigners in the Warren campaign. They know that there is no fucking way. Sorry for the F-bombs, guys. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's not Twitch,
there's
buddy.
no way.
Well, I mean,
There's
it is.
No.
It's not exclusively Twitch. Go ahead.
I used them all up for the day. I'm sorry about that. There's just no way that that would happen. And from what I saw for the Bernie campaign, seems like not true. Now, it doesn't mean some inexperienced field organizer or volunteer had some document at some time. But the way the cynical manipulation and use of this story by the Warren campaign to like basically dredge up 2016, build in that narrative of divisiveness, which we all know is total BS, and then fundraise off of it, I was like super disgusted by it. I think everybody else who I've seen run across the story feels the same way, because there is just absolutely no truth to this, and every experienced campaigner would have detected this instantly as not possibly true.
Well, I mean, apparently, and I don't who's tweeting that out. I mean, I don't know who. Yeah, I don't know that.
Antifa.
All I know is
Clearly.
that there is the reality is that they all signed all the canvassers signed an agreement that basically says you don't say anything negative.
And there were Bernie campaign people at the TMBS show in Philly, and they all said like, yeah, that's not even on the table that we would go negative on Warren.
Right, and here's the thing. I mean, I am less disgusted by it. Look, the campaigns have strategies. This has been, I think, on some level, the trajectory of the Warren campaign on some level. To me, what it does is and I, as a senator and as a potential president, frankly, there's a lot of things that I am very positive about in terms of, feel very positive about in terms of Warren. The reality is, from a political standpoint, their campaign has been, they apparently have no strategy. And I will say this from the DNA thing. I mean, I think it's perfectly understandable to me that it was, her mom told her that, some family lore and that she believed that. And I don't think that she exploited that over the years. I think she just believed it. I mean, I thought that I was, it's unclear to me. For years, I thought that my mom's family came from Hungary. And then recently she said, no, I think it's Poland. Now, we don't know. And I'm not going to do one of those 23.
You stole that Hungarian valor.
But the point being, the campaign has had two major flaws politically, it seems to me. And these are just political ones. One is the need to respond to critics about silly stuff. Like, I don't think that she needed to put out a finance plan for Medicare for all. I think, Bernie has less of a comprehensive plan on how to pay for it. And I think that is politically smart. And or if you're going to come out with a plan to pay for it, then do it on day one. But if you make it look like you're responding to critics, it makes you look weak. And Elizabeth Warren, I do not think is a weak, politician, as it were. And I would say the same thing for the DNA stuff. Why respond to Donald Trump? She doesn't need to do that. Why respond to the question of how you're going to pay for Medicare for all? You simply say, there's plenty of ideas out there how we will do it. Here's a couple that I appreciate. We're going to give you the details when we push it through, but I'm not going to negotiate against myself. That's what dumb George Bush said. And this, making it about that you should vote for me because my opponent, and it wasn't the case, but having to gin up like I am being, critiqued about who supports me and my ability to appeal to a wide range of people. I mean, it just makes her campaign and her political chops look weak. And we, more than ever, although this is not a new concept, strong and wrong is better than weak and right. And strong and right is even better. But there is no calculus where this works. And I think that her whoever's advising her at the top of her campaign has failed to have her run on her strengths. She has, look, I think everybody with half a brain knew 6 months to a year ago that Elizabeth Warren represented, and nobody knew if this is what it would come down to, but represented a potential compromise between the Bernie Sanders supporters and the Joe Biden supporters. I mean, I think everybody, you could just look at it, anybody who followed politics at all understood that. But you do not run as the compromise candidate. You run as what you bring to the table and let it shake out. It wasn't like Bernie was ever going to veer to her right, and it wasn't like Joe Biden was going to veer to her left. She should have just run on her strengths instead of feeling like she had to answer the critics to maintain, the ability to be palatable to different sides of that equation. Because she was going to be there anyways, and stuff like this is not going to help her. And it doesn't disgust me as much as I find it frustrating to see because it's divisive. Frankly, it's like it is what everyone is pretending to condemn. And frankly, I'm not as concerned about it because I think Warren's supporters will ultimately the plurality of them, if not the majority of them, will support Bernie. I mean, who knows in the primary if it comes down to she ends up dropping out. Maybe she doesn't drop out. But if she did, and I certainly feel like everybody who's going to vote for Elizabeth Warren is going to vote in the general election for the most part. Yeah. I mean, but it's it's not effective. It's just simply not effective.
Well, that's the craziest thing about this. Like, at least in 2016, the Clinton campaign was able to locate some legitimately sexist garbage being hurled her way by either real Bernie supporters or bots or whoever on Twitter. This criticism, it's just a statement of fact. I don't even think I would call it an attack per se. Like, this is the worst thing you could find. Yeah, you guys are in trouble. And I want her to be better at politics, believe it or not. I obviously support Sanders this time around, but she's still one of the better Democrats and might be the nominee eventually. And for that reason alone, I want her to be better at this.
I agree.
On that point, I would say, I've been much more, I was probably strongly in favor of Warren as a choice in the beginning of this campaign. But I've just seen that she's a bad campaigner and she has terrible political instincts, whereas Bernie is the opposite. So the rationale for her candidacy has just been totally annihilated by the conduct of her campaign, be it from, the people she's brought in, the way she reacted to the DNA scandal, the way she reacted to the financing of Medicare for all. It's important to point out that her financing plan for Medicare for All included a head tax, which is regressive, just so she could say, I'm not raising middle-class taxes. So she's supposed to be the wonk, right? But she's actually choosing suboptimal policies for political reasons.
I think the head tax. I look there. That's controversial. I mean, let me just put it that way. I don't think that's settled. That head tax, as you articulate it, is necessarily aggressive. I know Brunig makes that argument. I've seen counter arguments that I think are also compelling. I think I don't think there is a single voter who is switching from Warren to Bernie or to anybody else because of that head tax. What I think happens is the vast majority of voters do not pay that much attention to it. And all they see is controversy. They see a cloud and they can't make out the definitions of that cloud around it. I'm not talking about people who listen to this show, or I'm talking about like normal people, even more engaged than normal people. But they don't necessarily see the policy implications of it. They just see like she's on the defensive, and being on the defensive, particularly in this era, is just not good. Now, I don't know that Bernie necessarily has better political instincts, to be honest with you, but he has the advantage of being singularly minded and almost, I mean, some people have argued to a fault, one-dimensional in his proposals. But what that does is it takes a lot of the questions off the table, right? Like there is some value to orthodoxy as you live your life, which is that your set of questions that you have to answer on any given day are less because you know the answer already. It has already been predetermined based upon now. I don't know if that is an advantage or a disadvantage in the context of governance. There's so many other factors that play into that. But in the context of an election, and you're running against someone like Donald Trump, who is not going to fight with nuance, who, like I say,
right.
He may say that Bernie Sanders is a socialist communist. But the problem is the conversation's not going to end there. And he's got nothing to say after that. He can't even explain what that means. And so he can get away with saying, like, crazy Bernie. But the point is that Bernie's not running on his sanity.
And crazy Bernie sounds like a cool guy.
I mean, it doesn't, like, whatever he comes up with, he could come up with like any type of saying, divisive Bernie. But the point is that Bernie's not running on any of those. What I'm just trying to like hypothetically come up with Bernie's not running on that. And I mean, specifically his slogan is me is not important. Like who I am is not important is literally his slogan. And all Donald Trump's strength is he attacks the individual. And he is not going to be able to do that with Bernie. There's plenty of things he could attack him on. But the point is that Sanders' campaign, if it is successful, if he gets the nomination and goes into the general, will not be contingent upon him. And therefore and this is a critique I made of Clinton. This was a concern I had about Clinton's campaign at this time in 2016. 2016 was maybe 3 or 4 months from now, was that she is running on what I considered to be a very strong, I'm just talking like, objectively speaking, her curriculum vitae, if you were going in for a job interview, was incomparable. Nobody had a better sense of what it takes to be president. I may not like some of the policies, but in terms of like close proximity to that office and seeing it from various perspectives, nobody had a better view of that. Maybe ever. Well, maybe not in modern era. Let's put it that way. I mean, I guess maybe like, John Adams, like, I had a sense, whatever. But in the modern era, nobody was the first lady, was there in those conversations, and then being Secretary of State and also being a senator. And I mean, nobody had that level of experience. But that was too much of an allure to run on, because at the end of the day, it became about like, I'm with her. Like it's about her, the individual, and she would have beaten any of the other candidates, I'm convinced, who would have been running on the same sort of playing field, which is, you should elect me. I was governor of Florida, and so I have executive administration. Of course, I grew up in a family with 2 presidents. I've seen what it takes, blah, blah, blah. Or you should, elect me, Marco Rubio, because I've been in the Senate, and I have a vision for this and that, and these are my experiences. She would have beat them. But when you're running against Donald Trump and you try and, if you decide to play on the playing field in which he is strongest, you will lose. And that's the problem.
I think I look at this and I hate to say it because I resisted this idea for a long time, but I see the outlines of a very similar campaign between Warren and Trump than with Hillary and Trump, in the sense that
I think her advisors did this consciously in the primary. I think I agree with you, but I think her advisors consciously did this, and it was a mistake.
No, of course it was a mistake. It was a horrible mistake. They've been making nothing but mistakes. Like the way that they shirked the Medicare for All fight. She came out personally. She always spoke very strongly, but then the messaging coming out of her campaign was wishy-washy. And so she lost a lot of people for who Medicare for All was very important, and she was like a good alternative. She had we don't even need to talk about how she took the Pod Save America guy's advice to take a DNA test to prove she's a Native American. I mean, the idea that Donald Trump is going to get evidence that you're actually Native American, so he's going to stop saying Pocahontas, is the most asinine thing I've ever heard. He literally kept arguing that Obama was born in Kenya, and he still says the Central Park Five are guilty, even though they're all exonerated by irrefutable proof.
Yeah,
so falling into this trap was so stupid, I can't understand it.
Yeah,
Did you see the photos she posted to show how not racist the figurines in her kitchen were?
Well,
that's what I'm saying. So that falls in the trap of the Hillary campaign, where you're constantly talking about how you're not actually racist, and she falls into all those right-wing tropes about things like affirmative action.
Who was better?
A bad candidate.
Who was more situated in this campaign than anyone to simply talk about policies? Nobody. And her campaign managers, her advisors, or whoever it was, they made a decision that we're going to be the compromise candidate, and so we're going to run in that way and always make sure that we're positioned that way, as opposed to just simply saying, like, there's no way we're going to get to the left of Bernie. That's not a danger. And there's no way we're going to get to the right of Joe Biden. That's not a danger. Let's just go forward with what Elizabeth Warren brings to it. And I think, look, part of it is it's hard to come out in your first national campaign and be pitch perfect. And in this, it's hard. It's hard to get it all right the first time. And I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of lessons. But look, it's not over. But I think this exchange was an example. And again, I'm talking about this only because it's a lament for me more than anything else, because I don't think this is going to help her, and I don't think it's going to do much damage long term. But I happen to be someone who thinks that the best opportunity for Bernie or Warren is to have each other in the race for at least until around Super Tuesday. And I think that's going to be the case, but
maybe
we'll see. Mike, appreciate the call.
All right. Well,
a longer, fun talking to you. Yes, it was always a pleasure. That was a longer, that went longer than I, yeah, well, I know, we'll clip it, but
it's on people's minds.
It is. And frankly, it has been like a bee in my bonnet for some time. And this really congealed a lot of the ideas that I've had about what their failure has been, and it's unfortunate, because I hold Warren in high regard, and there is a I think there's been a disservice. Now, obviously, like, you pick your campaign people, and you have responsibility for that. That's the team you assemble. But from a political perspective,
well, the debate might be kind of lit this week.
I don't think they're going to go at it in the debate.
Well, don't you feel like the media is going to try to provoke them, though?
I think so. I think there's going to be, I think Bernie, my guess is Bernie's going to diffuse it. I think Bernie understands, and I think his campaign understands that they cannot win without a plurality, if not a majority, of Warren supporters. And there will come a time, maybe it will be in Iowa, where because if your first place candidate does not get through a certain round, you go to your second place, and they want to still be that second place candidate. And so it is, in my estimation, been a very smart move to not attack Warren. I do not think that making the argument, look, put up the Politico thing. Do we do a chair sheet of that? Look, this is just a bit of analysis, right? That was done in July of this year by Politico of last year, of 2019, where they say essentially what was in these talking points. Now, one of the sad things about, here it is, Politico, what was the date of this? This was July 12th, 2019. In poll after poll, Sanders appeals to, quote, that's all quote, to, lower income and less educated people, men and younger people who vote less frequently. While Warren's camp consists of people with postgraduate degrees, women, and seniors who follow politics closely. Now, this is the argument that I have made about, and we haven't seen this because they don't do polling this granular, or to the extent that they do, it's not public. That I've argued about Joe Biden's black support versus Sanders' black support. That Joe Biden's black support, and this is complete speculation on my part, but it's analogous to this, are high propensity voters who will vote for the Democratic nominee, whether it's Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders' black support, I think, are probably lower propensity voters who may not vote for the nominee if it's not Bernie Sanders. And that's the argument that Politico is making about Bernie Sanders' appeal, at least in July of 2019. Now, I presume that this dynamic has not changed dramatically. And so to state it as a bit of an analysis or an assessment is just the fact of it. I don't know that I would send canvassers out there, but we have a very weird electorate right now where they, because of social media, because, of the way that, campaigns now operate, and it's like the Sanders campaign and other campaigns, they're attempting to be their own little social media networks. That everybody sort of like has a take that is at arm's length from what they feel. And so making an argument about electability based upon this type of data, 20 years ago was just not that big of things didn't get that complex or sophisticated in the way that people make assessments, because most people wouldn't know about it.
But it's hardly trashing to point out these facts.
It's not trashing. It's certainly not trashing of Warren. And it's not even necessarily trashing I don't think it's trashing of her electorate, who, I fit that demographic.
Well, I think a lot of them feel guilty for fitting that demographic, though, probably.
I don't think that's necessarily the case either. Maybe there's some.
I don't like to think of myself as an affluent, educated, white liberal. The copy that went out in the email was pretty similar to that.
What that in her email?
Yeah, in the fundraising email.
I think there's definitely some sensitivity that it's not a working class sort of movement behind Warren.
I mean, I guess I think that's probably a sensitivity more from like Bernie supporters. Like I don't know that Warren supporters are self-conscious, like have that level of consciousness. All right, that's the
they're at least conscious about their lack of diversity racially. They certainly understand that.
I mean, I guess they could look at the polling and see that it's also conceivable that a lot of people just decide that they just are subjects of polls rather than actually like consumers of polls. Like I would bet maybe that's not the case. I don't know, but regardless,
I mean, we can pull up the copy from that fundraising email if you want.
Okay. I'm spending a lot of time on this, but it's a big story. All right, here it is. Okay, last night we got some disappointing news. Bernie Sanders' campaign is instructing volunteers to dismiss our broad-based inclusive campaign by saying the people who support Elizabeth are highly educated, more affluent people. When I heard that description, I didn't recognize it. That doesn't describe me. Well, yes. Or many of the passionate voters, volunteers, and organizers I know. This type of attack isn't about disagreeing on the issues. It's about dismissing the potency of our grassroots movement. Let's be clear. As a party and as a country, we can't afford to repeat the factionalism of the 2016 primary. To win in November, we need a nominee who can unite a broad coalition of Democrats who will excite every part of the Democratic Party and inspires more people to join the fight. This is why I don't think, you see, when you see the theories that maybe, they generated this, like they're really taking a square peg and putting it into a round hole here. Here's why it's personal for me. My parents were immigrants from China. What? Who?
I guess Liz didn't write this one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to say, all right. Yeah, they waited tables.
Like, wow, she's trying it again with China?
No, this is... I'm Elizabeth's campaign manager. She's lived in the American dream too. Growing up in Oklahoma, her family barely hanging on to its place in the middle class. We're fighting to open doors for the next kid to get ahead. I have all the respect in the world for Bernie Sanders, but when talking about our movement, his campaign has it backwards. I hope he reconsiders what he's encouraging.
This is at all a subjective metric.
And it's not a comment on the people working on Warren's campaign. It's the comment to the people she's going to bring to the primary polls.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. They're taking a square peg and putting it into a round hole.
They're taking a statement of fact and turning it into a value judgment.
Look, I also look, every campaign does this. And the question is, to what extent is it effective? I personally thought in Bernie's 2016 campaign, when it became all about the rigging, it had a similar feel to this. It was like, we're going to make a process argument because we've run, the potency of the arguments have run out, and I feel to a certain extent that this is also like, wait, what? It's not. This is not an attack on Warren. It's just simply restating a fact of the nature of the support. And so
yeah, every campaign has made an electability argument too. Like the Bernie Sanders campaign is not the only one.
Of course. I mean, it's, but it's just campaigning. Like, Mike's disgusted by it. I think that's a little overwrought. I don't think it's going to be terribly effective.
This story coming out now, I know we want to move on, but there's a story apparently that Bernie Sanders told Warren in a private 2018 meeting that a woman can't win, which I think people are taking suspiciously because this is the first we're hearing about it. And is it coming from Warren? Bernie's campaign has denied it, and Warren's campaign has said no comment.
Damn. I think we might be seeing a lot more of this.
Without a doubt, of course.
And
like we just said, they're running the Clinton campaign.
And that's disappointing because, like, I sincerely thought that Elizabeth Warren was better than that. I did.
I mean, look, campaigns do things. Like, I don't think that, I think it.
Yeah, well, she's in charge of it.
Right. And like I say, I thought the Bernie's rigging thing was silly. And I think at one point, like, they lost the thread a little bit with, like, her campaign, with their speeches in front of the banks, whatnot. But the problem with this is that the reality, I don't know if this is true or not. I don't know if Bernie Sanders, told Warren that a woman can't win. But anybody who says that they're not concerned that this country showed enough misogyny last time, now I happen to think that misogyny was not there's no doubt in my mind that misogyny plays a role in this, right? Like, I don't know what the percentage points that Hillary Clinton lost because she was a woman, but there's no doubt in my mind that there's a number associated with that. And I happen to think that simply starting with by virtue of the fact that Elizabeth Warren does not have the baggage that Hillary Clinton has, that the outcome would be different in a general election. But there are people, again, who are playing the role of political pundits, and after watching Hillary Clinton lose, are convinced that that misogyny was the determinant factor. I don't think that it was. I think it was at play, but I think there were, like I say, there was 12 but-fors as to why she lost. But I don't think that there is, and it may work in the context of the Democratic primary, it may not. But I think that one of the things you got to be careful of when you have an electorate that's a bunch of pundits is that if you raise the specter of is misogyny going to keep Elizabeth Warren out, I think there's a lot of women who, after Hillary Clinton's loss, sadly took the message, and sadly either because it was correct or not, that a woman can't win in this era. And I don't know that reminding people of it on the eve of Iowa is necessarily the smartest play. I think, the idea is to build some resent towards Sanders. But, this is the era when the campaign does this.
Well, I will say, and this goes back to the argument that I had with Michael, and I think you agree with me on this, that there is a number, I don't know if it's a huge number, but there is a number of Warren supporters who will refuse to vote for Bernie if they think Bernie supporters are being mean to them or their candidate. Well,
I think that happens all over the place, right? I mean, I think that I spoke to a lot of Bernie supporters at the DNC who were personally affronted by the way they were treated.
Yeah, and maybe it's not fair. Maybe they're applying a double standard. Maybe they're a bunch of triggered snowflakes. But that is a political reality that Bernie and his supporters need to deal with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think this is not, it goes both ways. Like, if, and for better or for worse, Sanders has, Sanders supporters have this reputation. Is it deserved? Well, only of a very narrow few. But, guess what? We live in the world, and a narrow few always end up representing more people. That's why, that's the whole idea of better dress well. You're representing our school today, or whatever it is. When you go to that tournament, to the spelling bee, everybody's going to behave. My kid goes to a school or my daughter went to a school where they would go off campus for lunch. It was public school, but they would go to lunch twice a week, as early as 4th grade. But they had to sign a document that says, like, when you go into the restaurant, you better be nice because you are representing the school.
Oh, yeah. I've had to reel in my spicy DSA takes since I became a member of a caucus.
I think this is all true, but I also think the signaling that Warren's doing now and going forward is going to make a lot more difference in who her supporters end up supporting than anything on Twitter.
I agree. That's also my big lament is that they're going scorched earth too. And I don't think that's healthy. I worry about that.